Greetings, you prototypical posthumans, you prequels to a sequel, you aspiring ancestors of AI, you master recordings intuiting your reincarnations as remixes. I'm Michael Garfield, welcoming you to another episode of Future Fossils Podcast, the podcast that explores our place in time, and which, given my historical propensity for discussing the complex ethics of Westworld and Blade Runner 2049, etc., might as well be a show called Don't Beat Robots. So file this episode under that particular subheading of Future Fossils shows in which we examine the perils and promises of exalting the dumb, insensate world of modernity into the intelligent and responsive world awaiting us over that digital rainbow. This week's guest is George Dvorsky, legendary science blogger for Gizmodo, IO9. He's been rapping about AI, robotics, transhumanism, future literacy, and also, strangely, dinosaurs for at least my entire adult life, which makes him practically a patron saint of Future Fossils. And it's a total treat to have him on the show and share this conversation with you. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the 125 people supporting me on Patreon, the 88 people who have rated this show on iTunes, and the 1,285 people in the Future Fossils Facebook discussion group. Y'all are awesome. It's really cool to have developed a small but focused community around these ideas and these discussions. And I'm honored to know that such a large fraction of the listenership for this podcast, something like 6% of you, are actually paid subscribers. Kind of blows my mind. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Innerverse podcast for joining that list of patrons. I was just on Innerverse for their 100th episode and had a really delightful conversation, so find them and check that out. And also to Laura Fash for upping her pledge significantly. You know it means a lot to me, but what does it mean to you? Well, after a thorough study of other people's Patreon pages, I think I can safely assert that I'm putting out entirely too much cool stuff for supporters, including fractal coloring book pages that I drew, a viscous and iridescent flow of strange but wonderful live acoustic electronic music, early release and exclusive episodes like the ridiculously sweet 3-hour conversation I had with legendary psychonaut and science fiction aficionado, the T-Fairy, early access to new writing for the Future Fossils book, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you like this show and you think that it should continue, then go sign up at patreon.com/Michael Garfield and help me do the work that it would take 6 people to do for an ordinary sane podcast. And also keep your ears out. In a week or so, I will be on the delightful Weird Studies podcast talking about my essay, The Future Acts Like You, which is really relevant to this George Dvorsky conversation, actually, talking about the digital simulacrum and the mind clone side-loading ourselves into the future by creating a living trace fossil, an AI copy of you that acts as your proxy, your mixed reality mini-me. But for now, here is a lovely conversation with George Dvorsky. Thanks for listening and enjoy. George Dvorsky, it is such a pleasure to have you on Future Fossils Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
For all the consideration that we give to the future in this show, it's strangely rare that I actually get a professional futurist on. So I'd like to structure this in kind of a lay format where, you know, you've spent in some cases years, considering these specific issues. And I think it would be fun to just kind of go through and get the expert stance on things. One thing in particular that I know is dear to you also is the conversation around near-term, real-world practical implementation of AI and what this is going to look like when we're running AI in your car or in your various appliances in your home. And I'm curious what you see as the most exciting and what you see as the most sort of troubling or concerning aspects of this, that where you feel that people ought to be putting their attention right now.
Yeah, this is exactly right. We're definitely no longer in the so-called AI winter, and AI winter being this period of time where development in this field is slow to non-existent, and everyone who was at one point enthusiastic about it suddenly feels that there's no future in artificial intelligence at all. We are definitely not in an AI winter right now, and much of that has to do with new ways of doing AI, most prominently machine learning and deep learning, but also things like reinforcement algorithms. And it's really revolutionized our approach to artificial intelligence. And we're starting to see the fruits of this pop up around us. This is no longer these kinds of conceptual things that we say, it's going to be 10 years off in the future or 25 years off in the future. I'm sure many of us opened up our Christmas presents back in December to find either an Amazon Echo or a Google Home. And now our homes are starting to become littered with these things. Literally only 2 or 3 years ago, this was still rather futuristic and conceptual. But it was, again, predicted many, many years. I was waiting for these virtual assistants as much as, 15 years ago, knowing that we would have these language user interfaces where you could literally just talk to a machine and it would understand regular English and then respond back to you. Clearly, it's incredibly primitive, like so primitive still. Like we'll imagine how we'll look back in 10 years, how stupid it was, like how dumb Alexa is, how she can't understand a thing, or how the kind of crazy responses that Google Home would give you. That's what's so beautiful about seeing these things pop up in our environment today, is because you can still see the potential, though. You can understand where the improvement needs to be, because you always push technologies further than they're kind of capable of. So we're already asking these things questions that we kind of know they don't have the answer to yet, in the hopes that maybe it's going to surprise you and give you a really profound answer. In fact, sometimes I'll ask. I am an owner of an Amazon. It's right next to me here. I have an Amazon the Dot. And sometimes I'm surprised at what answers she's able to give me. But it is in a way right now, as a friend recently said to me, it is kind of a glorified calculator. Because the things that I ask it to do is to, convert. I write for Gizmodo, so I'm constantly having to convert units of measurement, and the tool is great for that, because I can keep typing and I just, using the language user interface to get those responses, get it back. But but then at the same time, you see also the pitfalls and the perils of these devices. I think a couple of days ago, I was getting ready for bed, and the lights were already out. And because I also have a Dot in my bedroom, suddenly Alexa started spewing off some kind of advertisement about new features that is part of the.
Oh no!
But I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty pissed, because I got thinking to myself, oh man. And then I looked into it the next day, and sure enough, these are notifications, and Amazon has warned that this will be part of part of what it is, moving forward. That it's going to push notifications to you, telling you about its features. And I wasn't satisfied with my ability to be able to disable those, because I didn't see what the toggle switch for that particular notification. So if we're literally putting these bots in our houses that are now just mediums for advertising, then that's kind of horrible, and I will flush it down the toilet without hesitation. We're starting to see new products emerge on the market on a regular basis. I'll choose the one that I feel is best for me, safest for my family, and as unintrusive as possible, one that just simply does what I need it to do. And so that, and at the same time, it also gives you pause for thought about some of the more, ethical side of things and the safety aspects of things. And I'm thinking particularly when it comes to children and how what their use of these devices are like. They're already having AI-enabled dolls for girls. where, it actually learns their name, learns certain tendencies about them, and starts to react to them almost as if they're like a real child or a real baby, but it's just a bot that's just script based. Maybe it's working on, machine learning. I'm not sure how sophisticated these things are, but it makes me wonder, if you're a 4-year-old girl, are you able to actually cognitively understand that is actually not an entity worthy of any moral consideration? Meaning, like, it's not a person. It's not something that she should really care about as another being. It's not like a kitten or a dog or a brother or a mother. It's just a dead doll. But can a 4-year-old wrap its head around it if this doll is actually referring to her by name, understanding what she needs, asking her what she wants? So that's something that we have to talk about. But also, let's take something like, let's take a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old's interaction with the Google Home, and it asks it certain questions. Should it be giving them the same answer as it would you or I? And how can we teach these devices to learn the difference between who's asking the question? So I often find, like so many technologies, they're often introduced well before we've actually answered these questions, and certainly before we've actually imbued these technologies with the capacities to figure these things out. In a similar way, the way algorithms on YouTube are feeding content to children based on their viewing behaviors, and we're finding that children they fall down certain paths and certain avenues where they watch certain types of programming that adults would have absolutely no interest in. But is it healthy? Is it good? Is it something we should be alarmed about? Maybe it's completely harmless. I don't know. But these are what technologies today, as they're appearing, are allowing us to kind of peer into the future so that we can tweak them and make them perhaps what we actually want them to be.
Yeah, I think about that. The research findings from a couple of years ago that people were significantly more comfortable riding in an autonomous vehicle if it had been given a human name and spoke to them in a human voice. And there's this thing about our cognitive bias to anthropomorphize or to personalize the thing that we're interacting with, and how in one sense this is actually a neurohack of extraordinary proportions for teaching the machines how to interface with us. Like you talk about, like the natural language speaking interface as a sort of holy grail that we're fumbling into. But this issue of the sort of philosophical question of the person on the other end of a transaction, and how it's becoming more and more difficult for us to know. I mean, you look at, to scale it out from robot and 4-year-old to, the way that our society is itself inadequately literate to deal with these things. The vast number of bots involved in social media steering public opinion about all these things. So I guess there's that ethical issue. There's the at what point, how do we start to tease apart these more nuanced issues of personhood? But then, also, you talk about opening our homes to all of these business actors that have different interests in our personal data. And I'm curious how you see this conversation like interfacing with conversations around cybersecurity and encryption, and like what privacy will mean in these new spaces.
Yeah, and we've been worrying about this for a long time. And who would have thought that we would, voluntarily bring these devices into our homes? What could be these massive, surveillance technologies? You look at, some Orwellian nightmare. It was imposed upon us. The state forced you to have these surveillance devices in your home, and lo and behold, we are voluntarily installing, purchasing them, and installing them in our homes, and just hoping that they are as secure and non-invasive as the manufacturers have led us to believe. Again, what they're telling us is that they're not actually listening, these devices, until you actually say the wake word. But how if that's okay, that could be true. I hope it's true. But how easy would it be for a manufacturer to disable that feature such that it's constantly listening, and such that all the dialogue that happens in your house is being fed to a data repository, and of course powerful filters go through it, go through machine learning, pattern recognition, can pick out perhaps conversations that are flagged for whatever reason, whether it's because that's what the company's looking for, or because maybe times are tough in the future and we're moving more toward a surveillance state, more toward authoritarian style governments, and they just want and are demanding access to that information. That's definitely a kind of a scary space for the future, one we most certainly need to keep in mind as we are introducing these tools in our homes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, these personal assistants. It can be any other thing in the house, these capacities. So as to how encryption and other security measures can play into that, that's not my immediate expertise, and I can't speak to that. But certainly security has to be something that is thought out at the development stage of these products. Let's take again, not that I want to keep picking on Amazon's Echo, but it's so insecure right now to be almost laughable. And again, I always like to look at things around us today that we will laugh at years from now and marvel as to how stupid it was. And so the ease at which you can order product with this device now. So let's say you set up you've got your Amazon account set up, your credit card is all set up. And I think really, I've never actually gone through this process myself, but as I understand, if you want to actually purchase something, you say, "Hey, Alexa, I want to purchase, 24 cans of Coca-Cola." Just going off here. Alexa, stop. Brutal, right?
Don't actually purchase that.
I'm actually going to turn it right off. Right off. Oh, death. What are you doing, Dave? I have to start to argue with you. Anyways, yeah, that's right. So it would have, as you saw, that set it off. It was ready to make the order. It just needed me to make a confirmation, and next thing you know, I'm getting 24 cans of Coke, shipped to my house. And there was, I believe, a prank on South Park where that triggered a number of dots or echoes all across North America. It just got it freaking out, which got me thinking, it's kind of absurdly easy to kind of mess with the system. And I was joking with my wife that a podcast like this one or a radio show or a TV show could definitely just go through the script, and next thing you know, Amazon is shipping out millions and millions of a product as some kind of elaborate prank. I'm not sure what kind of safety measures they have for that, but you see how flimsy it is, right? You see how easy it is to get around it. The wake-up word is a very flimsy barrier right now to infiltrating an individual's account. But how do you fix that? I initially thought, okay, the wake-up word would have to be actually a password, but then you have guests come over and other things, and they'll learn your password very quickly. So it's going to have to be, it'll be voice recognition. It'll be biometrics. So there's almost always like a fix to these things, right? You just have to be creative when it comes to coming up with solutions. If I might just jump to a different topic, only because it just kind of triggered this in my mind. So recently at a conference it was an artificial intelligence conference in Toronto. And we were talking about autonomous vehicles, I'm glad we're going to move away from the virtual assistants. Maybe now we can talk about autonomous vehicles a little bit. And as we're fully expecting, these things are going to be super safe, right? That's kind of the point, as I understand it, and as I certainly demand in these vehicles. So somebody brought up this scenario that kind of made me shake my head because I realized, oh man, this could actually happen, which is pedestrians could basically kind of run amok in this future world. If all these cars are autonomous and they're designed to never hit a pedestrian, what would prevent pedestrians from just walking out and jaywalking left and right, knowing that these cars are just going to have to slow down and let them go through? And that, oh my God, this future world of it would actually really mess with traffic flow and mess with the cars, and people would, be able to walk all over the streets and all that. And it's a bit of a fantastic scenario now that I mention it, because what's to prevent people today from doing that? Because I think most drivers wouldn't dare hit a pedestrian. I think we trust perhaps a human driver less to actually stop for a jaywalking pedestrian than we might trust an artificial intelligence. But notwithstanding. It seemed initially to be an intractable problem. One of the first solutions I had was that, okay, what you do is you just impose a rather lofty fine for jaywalking, like not just a slap on the wrist, but a hefty fine. Like in Canada, for example, because I know it varies from state to state, but in the province where I live, Ontario, if you're caught speaking on your cell phone while driving, that's a $500 fine. That hurts, right? So why not give jaywalkers a similar fine for a similar offense? And it's extremely enforceable because the car will just have a camera on it, facial recognition, takes your picture off to the police department. The next thing you know, you've got a bill in the mail for $500 for jaywalking, similar to what they do at red light cameras do a similar thing. And not with facial recognition, but with your license plate. And when you do run red lights, you do get a picture back of your smiling face as you're running through the red light. But again, the only point I'm bringing this up is new technologies kind of introduce complexities that maybe we didn't anticipate. Oftentimes the tendency is to panic about it and say that there is no solution, but if you think about it through, more often than not, there are ways in which we can deal with this. We can find, again, solutions. That's what we do as a species. We've done this. This almost human civilization is predicated on technological innovation, problem, solution, and we move forward.
So that's it. It's an interesting point you make that even though as a rider, people are still sort of chewing on their trust of the driverless car. Most people are still a little sketchy about it. But as a pedestrian, yeah, it does seem straw poll wise that most people would be more willing to step in front of a robotic vehicle than, a car where somebody's like asleep at the wheel or potentially asleep at the wheel. And it seems this issue of trust is such a fascinating one when it comes to delegating our own decision-making power to artificial intelligences. You get this it shows up in all these different ways with, the fact that, like more than 90% of the financial trading is carried out by high frequency algorithms now. And so it's like, and yet we're still in this conversation about on the loop, off the loop with respect to automated weapons. And so I'm curious, how you see this playing out as our trust issues interface with artificial intelligence taking over more and more of the functions in our everyday lives.
Yeah, that's a huge barrier right now. And you're right to point out that we're still kind of coming to grips with what it'll mean to have, access to autonomous vehicles. And I'm not sure if this speaks exactly to what you're saying. And maybe it speaks more to the confused ethics that we have. And not even confused ethics. It points to the fact that we have literally thousands and thousands of years of ethical discourse. And it seems that the introduction of machine autonomy is really forcing us to apply these learnings in a way that we've never had to deal with before. So a good example was, I think a couple of years ago, people were surveyed about kind of like trolley problem scenarios as it pertains to autonomous vehicles, and they were, again, given the classic scenarios. Again, you've got an autonomous vehicle and there's a passenger in the vehicle, and it's careening toward a bus stop with 10 people at the bus stop. The only possible maneuver is to steer into, a guy in a sports car, and likely killing the guy in a sports car. What do you do? And these kinds of, there's a whole body of trolley problems, some more complicated than others, where you throw people into the path of destruction that weren't normally in the past, or using people kind of as a means to an end to avert larger scale destruction. So, but anyways, people for the most part, they said, yeah, it makes sense. Like this makes total ethical sense. You can't kill 10 people at a bus stop and especially if the only alternative is if you do have that other alternative of killing a lone individual. Great. Other scenarios, for example, are such that the driver, or rather the passenger of the autonomous vehicle, would be the one killed. So instead of hitting, for example, the 10 people at the bus stop, the only option is for the car to drive into a brick wall, possibly killing or badly injuring the passenger. Once again, most respondents are like, yeah, get it too, makes sense. These kinds of utilitarian, machinations and sensibilities in our brains kind of light up and say, yeah, this kind of makes sense. But here's the crazy thing about this study was, now they asked the respondents, well, would you buy that car? Would you want to be a passenger in that car? And the vast majority of people said, no, that's not the car. That's not the car for me. Not the car for me. That's not how I want this to roll. Which to me I was flabbergasted at that result, because if there was ever a once your cake you need it too scenario, that was it, right? Like, oh really? So it's good, what's good for the, what was good for the goose is not good for the gander here type thing, or so. It made me realize that people need to start thinking about these issues much more deeply and with much more consideration and thoughtfulness, and not just kind of like be selfish about it. Because what I would ask people to do as well is ask yourself, like, if you're in that situation, if you're actually driving the car, so forget autonomy, you're actually driving that car, what are you going to do in that split second that you have to think about it? You probably drive into the brick wall and kill yourself. Maybe 9 out of 10, maybe 6 out of 10, maybe 99 out of 100. I don't know, but to me, my own gut instinct is that very, very few people would brazenly and willingly plow their car through a bus stop filled with passengers. So why do we feel that we wouldn't want to own a car that's programmed with that same ethical sensibility? So you were talking about trust earlier. This is kind of having to do a little bit about that. Trust definitely applies when, again, as you were suggesting, there are some scenarios when we're out of the loop, so-called. And that's definitely an issue in autonomous weaponry, where, as I'm sure your listeners are aware, the drones that fly over Afghanistan or Pakistan whenever a missile should fly off or engages in any kind of military action, it is controlled by a human. There is a human still in the loop that makes that killing decision. We have not at the stage yet where we have, Terminator type robots that will make those decisions, but we're having those conversations, and doesn't take a crazy imagination to understand why we want to do that. And of course, we have the technologies that can make that possible. So now imagine that you've got, bots, whether they be drones or autonomous tanks, going out into conflict areas. It has to make some kind of an assessment. If human is out of the loop, it kills an enemy combatant, or does it? Did it kill a farmer or a rake? Did it just screw up its visual processing? How does it even go about some of the levels of complexity that soldiers and had to have struggled with, for a long time when it comes to determining friend from foe. So there are this. And of course, the potential for this to be hijacked by terrorists, to have these technologies now thrown in our face against us, raise another interesting possibility, such that you're already seeing groups emerging, institutes emerging that are calling for bans on autonomous killing machines. There was a talk at the United Nations late last year. Again, just trying to get this conversation going that there should be a moratorium, and that we should never, ever allow humans to be out of the loop when it comes to killing other individuals. There is a school of thought that's opposed to that, saying, look, this is the fact that we should not want humans killing humans. What parents want to send their child to a foreign country to get killed, when you could actually send a machine over to do the same job. By the same token, you can see how repulsive that might be. It might make the act of killing all the more easier and more convenient. So strange days ahead. And unfortunately, I'd like to tell you that I know the answer to this question, and that we will ban these sorts of weapons, but historical precedent being what they are, this is probably not going to happen. If you can point out to me, we do have bans against chemical weapons and biological weapons, yet we see in recent history these things get used when time gets tough. That's the thing, whenever like an army or a regime or whenever push really comes to shove, when their backs are against the wall, I can't think of any more cliches, they will use these illegal weapons. And, back in the 19th century, in the late 19th century, when they started to develop things like hand grenades and the machine gun and these weapons, they freaked out. And I believe it was Nicholas II of Russia. He, alarmed by this, he held a conference. It was kind of like a precursor to Geneva Convention stuff. He said, we're going to ban this, and ban this, and ban this. And I think most people were kind of on board with the idea. But when wars broke out, it was like, no, they used all the tools that they had at their disposal. So why should we assume that we're any different? We should not be presentist in this sense. We have a long history of having these crazy new weapons suddenly at our disposal that shocked us, that alarmed us, that thought that we're now engaging in in indiscriminate. At the time, they were really upset about the the impersonal aspect of killing, that you can kill people at an extreme distance, which is something you could not do before. Similarly, today, our discomfort is humans not even involved in the killing now. So not even at a distance, but not even a human involved anymore. And that's causing us to be perturbed a little bit. And why we're starting to think, now we need to ban these weapons, because God only knows where that's going to lead down the line. So that's definitely one of the more pertinent areas of AI discourse today, is the looming advent of autonomous killing machines.
Yes, indeed. That is not a yes of excitement. That is, of course. Although I was excited to see the RoboCop remake from a few years ago, because it really did feel like now is the time to return to this material and these questions. But I think about this stuff, and even before you brought it up, I was thinking about that early attempt to suppress machine guns and long range artillery, and just how futile that is in retrospect. But at the same time, we would like to believe that we can preserve the best things about our humanity, and that it's not just this constant compromise of, okay, well, all right, that's the new normal. So, what do you see as the canny, practical, but not cynical, not pessimistic, not unreasonably, Pollyanna optimistic? There's a middle road here. There's a way where people can rise to an occasion of technological literacy and ethical, contemplation. And I mean, what do you see that looking like? What are the challenges that we're being faced as individuals living in this kind of a world?
Look, I mean, I'm on Team AI. I'm all for it. I cannot wait what artificial intelligence is going to do. Drug discovery, for example. Looking at for example the virtual assistants. 4 to 5 generations from now, where in for all intents and purposes they will be acting as our virtual selves. That it will our virtual assistants will know everything about us. Know our tendencies, our proclivities, how we will likely, the kinds of decisions we would likely make. And they'll be our proxy selves, and we'll let them do work on our behalf. Ultimately, we'll be, at the end of the day, we'll be responsible for their actions and their behaviors. But it will be that close enough of an approximation that'll allow us to do other things as humans, but also you could send fleets of these things to do work for you. We can be so much more productive. That's what astounds me about AI. Not to mention, again, the ways, med tech is definitely a huge interest of mine. So I immediately, lean there towards where I feel AI could help. But there's almost no field in which AI will be irrelevant. Materials development, space exploration, of course, enabling robots to do what they need to do. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I do want to just make it clear that I'm very much on board with what we can do with artificial intelligence and where we need to take it. But as you can probably tell, I do have my concerns as to some of the darker avenues.
Well, I guess what it boils down to for me, or another way of phrasing this question would be, what do you see as the necessary literacies for an average person moving into a world where we are volunteering these proxies to act on our behalf? And so, and I just see, like, it occurred to me about a year ago, and I was working on a painting. I've got a lot of artist friends, and I was like, what if I could assign an emulation of myself to spend an entire, and now we're blurring the line between artificial intelligence and artificial consciousness, and we can kind of just bracket that. But like, let's say that I could train a system that understood my artistic style and then could study one of my friend's styles and kind of can digest it and produce a piece that is like 20 years of studying a master. And then I thought, oh my God, we're going to see this arms race of people who are just absorbing each other's abilities and forming these, that I think about the Centaurs in chess, where you've got teams of humans paired with artificial intelligences, and they're all going together. So like, how does a person live in this world? Like, what is it going to take for your ordinary human being to, what kind of literacy would be vital in this space?
Wow. I mean, I think definitely, I think acceptance to a certain degree. And I think one risks, fighting against these trends because it'd be, I think, a losing battle. The trick is to stay, at least to keep pace with these developments and find ways in which you can work alongside it. I love that you brought up the Centaurs because that's I think a huge area in the future because we're so far away still from artificial general intelligence. The kind of general intelligence that you and I we're a super generalized form of intelligence. We can problem solve. I can drop you in the middle of nowhere and you can get your bearings and understand the context. AI. Not even close to that right now. They just do very straightforward, simple things with what's referred to as narrow AI. But what if we can pair a system with a human? You do get, I might use this word, a synergistic result, and that's what the chess masters are learning that they can produce some remarkable results when they work in tandem with the computer. And I don't think that chess is going to be the be all and end all of this area. I think virtually anything. I think art's a great example. Imagine composing music with an artificial intelligence at your disposal, and with a language user interface as well. You can communicate what it is you need, what you're looking for, what inspiration you need to draw from, and to together create something incredibly complex and beautiful, something that a human couldn't do all by themselves, and something that an AI most certainly would not have been able to do all by itself. And even at work, whether you're an accountant or you're in finance, if you have an AI at your disposal to maybe put you and enable you to kind of go into a place you wouldn't normally go. I think that's something that I think individuals need to be aware of. So that's the kind of form of literacy I think that's important. But also knowing, understanding limitations, to be cynical when new products are released and you're immediately working with them to understand that, look, this is a company that they're trying to make a profit. They're trying to sell these en masse, and they're trying to steer you into certain directions to make you feel that you need that. So, as always, ask yourself, what is the problem that this solution is trying to solve, and can you fully articulate it as a problem that needed to be solved? And also be critical of some of the features that are part of these products. I'm becoming increasingly annoyed, for example, at the canned responses. Like I'll say to the Alexa here, which I've turned off, so I can say, Alexa, Alexa, Alexa. It's kind of liberating, actually. Alexa, Alexa, and I get no response now. I killed it. You could say, set a timer for 2 minutes, right? And it'll say, Siri does this. Apple Siri does this. I'll say, Siri, set a timer for 2 minutes, and she'll say, timer set. The suspense is killing me. I'm like, okay, maybe the first time it was charming, but then there's only about maybe 3 or 4 of these preset canned responses, and now it's just annoying. And it also got me wondering, what if maybe some of these responses were kind of maybe inappropriate even? What if it's a very serious situation? This is another thing, like, we like to think when they're developing these things, they like to think, you're just setting it for the barbecue or for your eggs to become, boiled properly. But what if it was like literally a life and death situation that requires some kind of functionality of your device and it's giving you these bizarre, stupid canned responses? Like, that's not funny and it's not helpful. On this topic of life and death situations, and again, not necessarily along this thread of what we're talking about now, but I just remembered a situation that happened in Britain. I think it was about a year ago, about a year or so ago, I want to say. And forgive me if I get some of the facts a little bit wrong, but I do believe the child involved here was only about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. And his mom was unconscious. And the only phone in the house was her iPhone. So it wasn't like in the old days when we were kids that we had landlines in the house and you could just pick up the phone and dial 911, right? I don't have a landline in my house, not anymore. I got rid of that quite a while ago. And when I had a landline in the house, people they would chastise me like, "You still have a landline?" Anyways, so you almost feel embarrassed to have one. Kind of influence the decision to not have one. But if you're a family with young children, this story should give you pause for thought, because when the mom was unconscious and there was no landline in the house and the boy picked up the phone, it was locked.
Uh-huh. So
it was locked. Yeah. And so this kid was pretty smart, and he grabbed Mom's thumb, and he used Mom's thumb to unlock it with her thumbprint. That's pretty resourceful for a 4-year-old in a panic situation, right? Not too shabby. And he in Britain it's 999, and he got the dispatch, and the first thing he said was, "My mummy's dead." And the lady on the dispatch, but this is all available on YouTube. You can look it up and maybe direct your listeners to this, the recording. I think I covered it at Giz. So the dispatcher asked some more questions and realized that Mom was in a bad way. So dispatched ambulance, fire, all that stuff, and they actually made it to the house, and they actually saved her life. So they actually revived her, and she was okay. But it is a learning episode because and when I wrote this, I got critical comments saying, "Oh, don't you know that you can unlock the phone for an emergency? Even you just have to swipe this and click that and move this." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well." You can definitely. Well, one, that might be a bit too complicated for a 4-year-old. But secondly, it might even be complicated for a grown person in a crisis situation. So again, just things to think about in terms of where not only where new technologies are taking us, but where the removal of tried and true technologies is now causing some gaps when it comes to some safety issues. So that's the story that always struck with me for a long time. And I think about it often. I wonder what else are we removing from our environment, or how are we constricting new tools in our environment to prevent some rather common sense, ways out of problems.
Totally. I mean, I just think of the failed efforts that we've made the mixed successes that we've had with scaling food production, and how now some of our most densely populated areas are food deserts. And it has a similar thing where, we trade certain conveniences. We lose something in that process. Like Nicholas Carr, in his book, The Glass Cage, talks about the possibility that turn-by-turn map directions are eroding our memory at a fundamental level, because all of our memories are based on the neural networks associated with spatial orientation. And I forget who it was he interviewed in that book, but he interviewed some neuroscientist who said, yeah, we're probably looking at a generation of early onset Alzheimer's from all of these people who are building these mental McMansions on sand. That they haven't. Yeah. So that's another ethical sort of. Definitely.
I had a hilarious dream literally a couple of nights ago. I was in the backseat of a car with my folks, and I had a paper map with me. And the interesting thing about the dream was that I didn't know where I was in the map. All I just saw was highways and roads and intersections and some geographical features. And I'm looking at the map going, I have no idea where I am in this map right now. So I was just looking around. So I'm comparing the map to my immediate surroundings, having to kind of get my bearings. And then I noticed, okay, some structures, some features here lead me to believe that I might be here. So I said to my dad in the dream, I said, if in a couple of minutes we get to a river, I know exactly where we are in this map. And by the way, one thing I didn't stress, I was futilely trying to double click on the map to get that locate. Like, on some maps you can like click and it'll auto locate you. Yeah. Just trying to get myself to locate, like I was using Waze or something like that, and it was not working. It's like, no, paper, which is funny because I can't believe I would do that in a dream. But you see kids, by the way, do that. You see like a 3-year-old pick up like a magazine. I've heard the story from so many parents. They'll pick up a magazine. They'll try to They say it's broken. This is me in my stupid dream. So sure enough, we managed to reach the river, and I'm like, amazing! I know how to read an analog map. I'm the best. This is crazy. But I remember the old days what it meant to plan a trip. I remember one time, the family would go to Florida, the drive from Ontario, Florida, and we'd just call up the maps and just do our best to try to figure what would be the most expeditious way to get from here to there. And now it's just absolutely done for us. And how fun would it be? I think if you've got young kids now, to put them through that exercise. I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. I think perhaps this kind of old-timey parenting, maybe just to show kids what's kind of involved in the process. But yeah, that's just my silly dream.
Well, in the totally relatable struggle of this dream, I hear something that you actually talk about this a lot, or you have over the last few years, and it's an area that I find literally keeps me awake at night. Where I a few years ago I saw the TED talk on the interspecies internet. And it was Peter Gabriel and Vint Cerf and a couple animal researchers talking about how is it that we're going to ethically involve, dolphins and primates and other persons, non-human persons, in the digital society, actually find interfaces for them and weave them in a way that they might even be able to participate culturally or even politically. And in that conversation, I hear what I also hear in your dream, which is this, like, the rushing to keep up, the confusion around which literacies and which platforms. And I get this sense of what it is to be a human now, trying to make sense of living in a global technological civilization, is probably actually not that dissimilar from what it's like to be a pet. And like not understanding why these people leave at this time of day, they come back here, what's going on over there. And so I would just be totally remiss if I didn't invite you to talk a little bit about the ethics of animal uplift on this, and how you feel this all fits in there.
It's funny that you asked me this. It's not a topic that I've given much thought in the last few years, but it really was, it consumed me for, I would say a while back, like I want to say around 2003 through to 2007 or so, that period there. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure if my perspectives or my opinions have changed all that much. So what I was arguing at the time was that, look, we are embarking, toward the reinvention of the human species. We're getting into this transhumanistic mode, moving toward the so-called posthuman, where the posthuman is by definition something that has capacities and physical features and all the things that are so vastly removed from what we consider to be normal human functioning as to no longer qualify as being a member of the human species. And that could be a completely cyberguised individual. It could be somebody that's been uploaded to the cloud, somebody who's like super genetically modified, or a hybrid of many of these things. And I also think about, we're free from disease. We are healthy, vibrant, happy, hopefully, and long-lived. I'm definitely a proponent of radical life extension as well. And then I got thinking that, man, like, what do we do? Just leave nature, to just wallow in its own misery, and not do our bit, as patrons of this planet to kind of, do what's what maybe morally right in this context. And I got thinking that we can't. The name of the paper was All Together Now. That this idea that we should all revert to a post-biological mode of being together. And I think it's perhaps a misnomer to think that we would have just that we'd uplift dogs and cows, let's say, to be human level capacity. That's not what we're saying. It is literally all together now, the transformation of the biosphere into something that is intelligent, like super intelligent. Of course, that's not functionally super intelligent. That might not even be possible. That's another podcast.
Yes.
But just to say at the very broad strokes, so that because the concern for me is I'm not a big fan of Darwinian natural selection. In fact, I hate it. It's kind of a brutal, mean-spirited way of for genes to figure things out, to keep proliferating. And if you think about the amount of suffering that must go on the world on a daily basis, it absolutely boggles the mind. It's something that we tend to not think about as our privileged status as human beings. But certainly got me thinking that if we are in a super privileged status of posthumans, what could we do to transform the biosphere and all the animal life on this planet? Do we just leave it in that state, in that Darwinian mode of existence? Or is there something we should do to kind of put it to an end, and maybe take all of the animals again, this is definitely in the realm of the fantasy and the science fiction, and forgive if it sounds a bit crude, but again, just thinking that we should let every animal retire into a state of post-biological, and transform them into a state of post-biological being. So take whales and cows and foxes and raccoons or whatever, and take those living beings and perhaps uplift them into something that is a bit more meaningful and certainly filled with a lot less suffering. So again, not having talked about that for a while, that's my Reader's Digest version of what I was arguing back then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's obviously the very long range.
It is a long
consideration,
range,
but like
that's not next week for sure.
Yeah, but in between here and there, I mean, we are now, very actively talking about what it would mean to lace a smart sensor grid into the Great Barrier Reef and turn the reef into a smart reef, so that we can act upon
exactly it.
Restoration ecology with reseeding new reefs with genetically modified acid-resistant corals and that kind of thing. And so, even though this particular issue of, do we pull everything with us is in one sense a very long-term consideration, in another sense, this question of geoengineering and ecological engineering as necessary adaptations to climate change are like in the days, are in the news now. And I'm curious how you think about the kind of ethical considerations around this stuff when it in a lot of ways it is like the driverless car. It's like certain situations are seemingly completely unpalatable until it becomes a matter of necessity and survival. And then
I just have a hard time imagining us. I don't care what your vision of the future is in terms of where we're heading and the kinds of timelines involved. But like honestly, like let's say 10,000 years in the future, a million years in the future, like are we really going to allow a lion on the Serengeti to take down an antelope and asphyxiate it to death, and then or even before that rip out its innards as it's still thrashing on the ground? Like this is a thing that happens all on a very regular basis, and has been happening for millions and millions and millions of years. Imagine if you somehow calculate all the suffering that went on during the time of the dinosaurs across the three different eras of the dinosaurs. Like that's this kind of like period of like super predators, right? It's just, this is an orb of brutality. And I'd like to think that, at some point in the future, again, like I said, not next week, not 100 years from now, but at some point, can we think about, and I like what you're saying, getting, the examples of corals might seem, like a small one, but it shows that, take these individual aspects of nature, these bits of ecosystems, and rethink how it might work. How can we keep this like a lush, verdant planet, for example, that it might even still have wildlife, and some of that wildlife we can retain its biological status, while maybe integrating some robotic aspects to it, or into intelligence somehow, reworking the entire planet in a way that we can't even begin to conceive of right now. And there's something of profound beauty. And at the same time, it satisfies our moral sensibilities. That now we've created a real thing of, again, beauty, for the lack of a better term, a wonderful place to live in the universe, as opposed to what it is now. And again, I would caution your viewers, because I get a lot of flack about this. Believe me, I get a lot of people think I'm absolutely nuts for this. But check your privilege as a human being constantly. All right? We have to understand that we are in that lofty position where we can very conveniently say, no, we should never do this to the animal kingdom. Who are we to do this? Well, that's easy for you to say. And just think, do you want Darwinian natural selection to still do what it's doing a million years from now, a billion years from now? Because it will, if we don't do anything about it. I don't know who said this, but there's an old saying, if we don't play God, well, then who will? So this is, I think, part of the post-human imperative, if you will, is to definitely play God. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the Stuart Brand was we are already gods. We might as well get used to it, or something.
Oh yeah,
to that effect.
Perfect. Yeah. Same sentiment. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a guy who, no compunction, talking about de-extincting the mammoth and restoring Pleistocene megafauna to North America.
Yeah.
That's where you get the moral considerations clearly have to reach beyond the individual and look at these wider systems. Well, I mean, we're coming up on an hour, so out of respect for your time, I want to wrap this up, but I do want to give you the opportunity. Typically at the end of these episodes, I invite somebody to think about this as a museum exhibit, like that you are in this audio archive that hopefully one day will be restored and poured over by the emulated virtual assistants of digital archaeologists. And even though we can never really be sure what they will find of value, because it's often stuff in the trash pile of the greatest interest to archaeologists, I'd love to just, leave a message to your future self and ask a question or offer some nugget to consider for posterity.
So advice to my future self, or something that I would not quite sure.
It's leave a book, take a book. It's anything. Advice, questions, strange silences with meaningful looks. We just have to.
Well, I would very much like to know if the concern that I currently have about where artificial superintelligence is going and the kinds of risks that it's potentially imposing upon us, I'd like to know if those concerns we have are truly warranted. Because there is a school of thought out there that suggests that, yes, we should be concerned, but we have nothing to worry about because human ingenuity, human foresight, even the use of AI itself will help us overcome what seems to be, by all accounts, a rather insurmountable challenge. So that's the one thing I'd like to know, and perhaps what and if it is perhaps more as difficult as we like to make it out to be, I would like to know what are the most effective pathways that we could take to achieve a safe future. So that's something that whether I impart that as this tidbit of information and for the archaeological record, but certainly maybe even something in terms of a capsule set that they will look back now, let's say 50 years from now, and say, this is what they were genuinely worried about. But even then, not so. Let me ask you this: do you think the so-called AI alarmists, like myself and the Nick Boströms of the world, and the Elon Musks, and to lesser degrees the Bill Gateses and such, and all the many academics who are working out there in this area, do you still feel that this is a minority fringe opinion, or do you feel that it's generally taken for granted that that artificial superintelligence is potentially existential in terms of its risks for us?
Is that a question for me?
I'm asking.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely one of the existential risks that is closest to getting its due conversationally. I think there's a lot of other ones that are not getting their due, but it's absolutely important, especially given people look at this stuff completely out of, it's in these overly simplistic and unrealistic ways, about like the Terminator scenario. And I think it's much more believable that what we're talking about is something more like superheroes and supervillains, that we're talking about people with, what would seem to us to be superpowers. And, how do we navigate a world where the individuals in this world are capable of doing things that currently only nation states are capable of? So it's a realistic concern.
Yeah, and I think maybe in the coming years, I think more and more people will start to understand what the risks truly are, and maybe we can start to work to do something about it before something bad really happens.
Awesome. Well, I'd say the odds are good that you will be remembered as a good ancestor. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Future Fossils is part of the MindPod network, along with Third Eye Drops, the Astral Hustle, Synchronicity Podcast, and an oodle of other fascinating programs. I encourage you to go to mindpodnetwork.com and subscribe to them all. And stay tuned, because we have some awesome episodes coming up on Future Fossils. But for now, may your now be exquisite, long, and wonderful.
Understanding that we've got a lot more to learn. The work is not done here.